Coming next here on C-SPAN, it's General Colin Powell's commencement address at Harvard University. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff spoke this afternoon about the past, present, and future role of the United States military. This occasion marked Harvard's 342nd commencement. General Powell's remarks are coming next.
My dear friends, I'm very pleased and honored to be with you today on this 342nd commencement day of this most historic and prestigious place of learning. First, I would like to congratulate all the graduates of the class of 1993. You should be very, very proud of your achievement, and I wish you every future success. I congratulate as well the faculty of Harvard for their contribution to this day. Once again, they have given their most invaluable gift of knowledge to yet another generation of great Americans. I am told that I am the first active duty military officer in over 40 years to be the commencement speaker, and so I feel privileged to stand here as a representative of the millions of Americans in uniform who are proudly serving their nation around the world today. Harvard and the military share a long tradition, and so I really do not stand here alone. I am joined by the living memory of George Washington's Continental Army, which was housed in Massachusetts Hall during our fight for independence. I am joined by the spirit of the 136 Harvard men who fought and died in the Civil War and whose sacrifices are remembered in Memorial Hall. I am joined by the spirit of Harvard's veterans of 2 world wars who quietly have their say through me, through Memorial Church right behind us. Harvard graduates also served in Korea and Vietnam and in all of the nation's wars. Some 47 years ago, in 1946, Harvard conferred honorary degrees on the leading generals and admirals of World War II, Eisenhower, Nimitz, and Arnold. Their spirits are here too. 1946, what a commencement that must have been. A world war ended, America victorious over fascism, a triumphant people facing a future that seemed to have no limits, a people ready to turn from war to the pursuit of prosperity. Harvard Yard in 1946 was filled with 20-year-old combat veterans who had won the war and were eager to build a peace. What a time that was. Although only a child, I remember America's Army exalted, cheered, smothered in the nation's adulation as it paraded through the concrete canyons of Manhattan. The armed forces and the people were as one in their moment of victory. In our giddy celebration of peace, we demobilized our armed forces, we stacked our arms, we sent our GIs home to raise their families, to make their fortunes, and to make their contribution to our society. But the party soon ended, and we awoke with a hangover called communism. And it soon became clear that America could not simply tip its hat to a grateful world and go home. The exhausted world of 1946 was building its hopes on this vigorous, powerful, can-do nation of free men and women called America. We still had a role to play. We still had a duty to perform. And our own future depended on us doing that duty. And it's a duty we've done, and we've done well, ever since 1947, when George Marshall came here to Harvard and stood on this platform. Perhaps the most famous speech ever delivered here, he committed America's wealth and America's leadership to the task of rebuilding Europe and of ensuring its peace and prosperity. There could be no going back after that. There could be no more turning a blind eye to the world. We had to be of the world, not just in it. And in the years that followed, we led a grand alliance through the Cold War, that long, awful twilight struggle with tragic surrogate conflicts in such faraway places as Korea and Vietnam. Most of my adult life was spent fighting the Cold War. It has also been my great thrill and privilege to see it all now come to an end. For me, the end began in November of 1987 as I sat in the hall of St. Catherine in the Kremlin alongside the Secretary of State. Across the table from us was the General Secretary of the Communist Party, Mikhail Gorbachev. I was National Security Advisor to President Reagan at the time. And this man, Gorbachev, was saying, to my astonishment, that the Leninist experiment had failed, that he, Gorbachev, was going to institute a sweeping reform of the Soviet system. He was going to try to adapt Lenin to the modern world, to the world that was flourishing on our side of the Iron Curtain. Back in 1987, to this poor infantry officer, that was heady stuff, unbelievable stuff. Yet in the breathtaking months that followed, it all came about. The Cold War did come to an end, and Leninism was not reformed. It was rejected by its own owners, swept aside, along with the Berlin Wall, the Iron Curtain, the Warsaw Pact, and ultimately, Mr. Gorbachev himself. And now here we are in 1993, again, as in 1946, a war behind us. We are again victorious, triumphant, ready to face the future, ready to turn from thoughts of war to the pursuit of prosperity, ready to turn from the twilight struggle to a new dawn of promise and progress. But this time, we are a little older. We must be a little wiser. We must be less willing than we were 47 years ago to believe that history has ended. And this new chapter of history that has just opened is making Kafkaesque demands on our view of the world, on our sense of what is real and predictable and what isn't. To be sure, this new world has much good news in it already. Although fitfully, democracy is making headway throughout the world, in Latin America, Africa, in Asia. Yes, with setbacks, but nevertheless, we can see the steady progress of democracy. We have watched a democratically elected Russian president, Boris Yeltsin, battle his way from the top of a tank towards a vision of freedom and economic reform. And recently, we saw this Mr. Yeltsin meet with a new young American president in Vancouver, British Columbia, and talk not about nuclear missiles and confrontations, but rather talk about economic partnership and a shared vision of freedom and democracy. But I must digress for a moment and ask, what happened to my colleague, Mr. Gorbachev? What happened to the man who set this revolution in motion, even though he himself turned out not to be a revolutionary? He did not go into the dustbin of history. In fact, Mr. Gorbachev has entered fully into the capitalist spirit of things. Just a few weeks ago, you may have noted he delivered a series of very profitable speeches in Virginia in honor of the 250th birthday of Thomas Jefferson. And that very same week, he opened an environmental institute at one of my precious former Army bases at the Presidio of San Francisco. Is this a great country or what? This new world we have entered is one where our domestic and international obligations will pull us in different and separate directions, where old formulas for computing our national interests no longer give us clear answers. The world map no longer has nice, neat lines separating friend from foe. It is pocked instead with the sores of a dozen tragic places with a host of once and future Iraqs, Somalias, Bosnias, and North Koreas. In this turbulent new era where power is more diffused, where we are grappling with the sudden reemergence of 19th century conflicts, we are once again seen as the great, vigorous, can-do nation on which the world is still pinning its hopes. The world is depending on the power of our democracy, on the power of 250 million Americans to do what's right. That world still looks up to America. It still turns to us for leadership. We have the responsibility to respond. As Winston Churchill said from this platform for the class of 1943, 50 years ago, the price of greatness is responsibility. And we will be judged in the future classrooms of Harvard by whether we rise to that responsibility. We will be judged kindly if we throw ourselves with all our creative vigor first into the industry of America, into creating for ourselves and our children the prosperity that brightens lives and underwrites the progress of our culture. So the restoration of our own economy must be the foundation stone of our role in the new world. We will be judged kindly if we renew the values of our communities, values of service, of family, of compassion, of wisdom. We can't aspire to greatness unless we begin with a foundation as well of values. And we will be judged kindly if we respond to this new world with a new strategy, with a new vision of our national security. President Clinton showed that vision at Vancouver. When he met with President Yeltsin, he committed us to a new Russia, to a new Europe, in the same way that the 1947 generation of leaders committed us to the post-war world of their time. The President has pledged to the newborn democratic Russia hundreds of millions of dollars in loans to help them get started. He has pledged our active support for their economic privatization. He has pledged our help in reviving their energy industry, and we are working hard to help the Red Army that is withdrawing from Europe and the former parts of the Warsaw Pact get settled back in Russia. He is doing all of this and more in the spirit of Truman and Marshall, in the spirit of Acheson and Vandenberg, with the same understanding that the peace and democracy and prosperity of other nations enriches the prospects and opportunities of our own people. He is investing not in just Russia's future, but in America's future as well. And he is proving to Russia and Eastern Europe that the hand that America offered in 1947, the hand that was rejected by Joseph Stalin then, is still extended now from a friendly people across the ocean.